Part 4. The next morning, Ains, also known as Morn, opened the guild's doors once more. The first thing he saw as he entered the room was the counter, where 3 of the guild's receptionists greeted the adventurers with smiles on their faces. There were warriors in full plate armor, nimble fellows in light armor and bearing bows, people in priest's garb and adorned with all manner of holy symbols, as well as robed arcane magic casters with their staves. On the left was a large door, and on the right was a notice board. There were several pieces of parchment upon it which he had not seen yesterday. Several adventurers were chatting in front of it. Annoyed by that sight and the many sticking out pieces of parchment, Ains moved forward to the counter. The eyes of everyone present focused on the copper plate around Ains's neck, and he could feel those eyes sizing him up from head to toe. It was just like yesterday at the inn. Ains was surveying the adventurers in turn. They wore gold and silver plates on their necklaces, with no copper plates. Feeling vaguely out of place, Ains advanced to the counter. A group of adventurers had just departed, freeing up one of the counters. He stepped forward and said, "Pardon me, but I'm looking for work. Then, please select a piece of parchment from over there and bring it here." Ains nodded in silence, feeling as though his non-existent sweat glands were now recovering some of their function. He arrived before the notice boards, looked across all of them, and then nodded. "Yup, I can't read any of them." One of the laws in this world was that spoken language was automatically translated, but written text was not. The receptionists walked him through everything the last time he came to the Adventurers Guild, so he had assumed they would do the same this time too. How naive. He wanted to scream, "Ah," and roll around on the ground, and then his emotions suddenly calmed down. Grateful for this property of his new body, Ains frantically racked his brains. While the literacy rate here was not high, it would be shameful if his inability to read was discovered by others. They might even look down on him. The translation item that Ains possessed was now in the hands of Sebas. During YGGDRASIL he had ignored spells of that sort and had not learned them. After all, he had scrolls, which could substitute for learning those spells. He cursed himself for a fool, for coming out without making preparations despite knowing that he could not read the language. Still, there was no point crying over spilt milk. Regret would not help him here. Nabril could not read the words either, so was of no use. Negative thoughts rose up in his mind, but as the ruler of Nazarick, he could not do anything embarrassing. After gathering his resolve, Ains ripped off a piece of parchment, and strode back to the counter. "I'd like to take this job." Confusion came over the counter girl's face as she looked at the parchment before her eyes. Then, she smiled bitterly and replied, "I'm very sorry, but this job is only for mithril plate adventurers." "I know. That's why I took it." The calm, unwavering tone in Ains's voice evoked doubt in the counter girl's eyes. About that. I would like to take this job. But, even if you ask, according to the rules. They're worthless rules. I'm fed up with having to keep proving myself with easy, pathetic jobs like this before my rank-up examinations. If you fail the job, many people will lose their lives. The receptionist's firm voice seemed to encompass the silent opinions of the countless people who had worked hard to qualify themselves by the guild's rankings. HMPH. Ains's snort drew hostility from the counter girl and the surrounding adventurers. Ains felt that their attitude was only to be expected. After all, he was a clueless newcomer who was sneering at the rules by which they abided. As an undead being, Ains felt nothing but the remnants of Suzuki Satoru's salaryman sensibilities that made Ains want to apologize to everyone around him. Suzuki Satoru hated those people who rejected others' opinions without offering solutions of their own, and crappy customers who knew nothing. Right now, Ains was part of the latter group, and he wanted to give himself a good punch. However, Ains could not back down easily. He wanted to, but he could still deal with a situation of this level. Therefore, Ains pulled out his trump card. The person behind me is my companion, Nabe. She is a magician of the third tier. The air shuddered with a collective gasp, and everyone looked at Nabril in surprise. In this world, third-tier spells were the highest which most magic casters could reach. Is he for real? The eyes of the surrounding people shifted to Ains's stylish full-plate armor, dubious of his claim. Adventurers wore equipment which matched their abilities. The stronger they were, the better the gear they outfitted themselves with. Ains's armor was very eye-catching, and he traveled with a woman like Nabe, both of which were very persuasive. Noticing the changes around him, Ains cheered inside his heart, and decided to strike while the iron was hot. I, personally, am a warrior of comparable strength to Nabe. I am very sure that a job like that would be a trivial task for me. The receptionist and the other adventurers were not as surprised in comparison to just now. They seemed to be looking at Ains with different eyes. We did not become adventurers to do jobs for a few pieces of copper. I wish to take on a higher-ranked job. If you wish to see our strength, I will be more than glad to show it to you. Therefore, can we take this job? The hostility towards them was fading rapidly, and there were whispers of, "Indeed, that's right," and "No wonder." Quote, after all, the rough men called adventurers valued strength, and they understood what Ains was trying to say. However, the counter-girl was a different matter. I am very sorry, but we cannot let you take this job due to the rules. The receptionist lowered her head in apology, and Ains took a victory pose in his heart. Then it can't be helped. It seems I've put you in a difficult position. Ains replied as he nodded in apology. Then, help me pick the most challenging copper plate job, then. There should be others besides the ones on the notice board, right? Ah, there are, I know. The receptionist stood up, and just as Ains was about to cry tears of joy at his absolute victory, a man's voice reached his ears. How about helping us with our work, then? What? He had reflexively responded in a low, threatening tone. Ains looked over, but all saw was a four-man adventurer team, their silver plates glittering on their necklaces. Ains grumbled internally after all the effort to misdirect them and turned to face those people. The job in question. It's a worthwhile assignment. Right. Well, I feel it's worthwhile. The person who responded was a man who looked like the team's leader. He wore some sort of banded armor, strips of metal woven together with metal threads over a leather or chain backing, and carried himself like a warrior. Should he join this man's team and work with them? Of course, he could decide after hearing them out, but then there was no telling if the receptionist girl would help them pick a job after he spoke with them. However, if he took the job, there would be a chance to build relations with them and obtain useful information. Several seconds passed. Ains slowly nodded. Worthwhile jobs are exactly what I seek. Then, let us work together. However, I would like to ask what sort of job it is. After hearing his response, the men asked the receptionist to prepare a room for them. It looked like a meeting room, with a wooden table lined with chairs in the middle. The men streamed in and sat down. Please have a seat. Ains did as he was told, and Nabril silently took a place beside him. The men were all quite young, probably under 20, but there was no childishness in them. They possessed immaturity which did not match their ages. Although they seemed to have seated themselves randomly around the table, judging by their distance and positioning, they could draw their weapons at any time. This unconscious display must have been a habit born from countless close encounters with death. Before we begin discussing the job, let us introduce ourselves. The speaker was the man who looked like a warrior. He had the typical blonde hair and blue eyes of the kingdom, and while there were no other distinguishing features on him, he looked quite handsome. I'm the leader of the Swords of Darkness, Peter Mork. That fellow over there is the eyes and ears of our team, the Ranger Volve. A leather-armored blonde man nodded in acknowledgement, and his brown eyes seemed to have a spark of delight in them. He was slender and long-limbed, kind of like a spider, but his lean torso was wiry and muscular. Next is our magic caster and the brains of our group, Ninya, the spellcaster. Pleased to meet you. He was probably the youngest person in the group, with dark brown hair and blue eyes. Though he was an adult, the smile on his face looked too youthful. Unlike the tanned skin of the group's other members, his skin was pale, and his face was the prettiest of the group's. It was more of an androgynous beauty than any masculine concept of attractiveness. His voice was higher pitched than the others. However, the smile on his face was like a mask, though it was not entirely fake. While the others all wore armor, he wore a leather robe. However, Ains could see that beneath the table he had various strange items in his belt, including oddly shaped bottles and peculiar wooden objects and so on. Judging from the term spellcaster, he was probably a magic caster of the arcane variety, like Ains. But Peter, can you not use that embarrassing nickname? But it's a good one. You have a nickname? Ains asked, with no idea what was going on. Lucret explained. He's a talent holder, and a genius magic caster. Oh, Ains murmured. They had tortured 3 of the Sunlight Scripture members to death to get that information, and now there was a live example in front of him. Ains was delighted. However, Nabril did not understand and simply snorted derisively. Ains sighed in relief after he realized that none of them had heard it. He was slightly mad because his incompetent subordinate was doing odd things like this during a negotiation. But getting into an argument here would not be productive either, so Ains quickly calmed himself down. It's nothing much, it's just that I happen to have a talent per time to that field. Oh. Ains was even more interested, and he leaned forward, straining to listen. Much like martial arts, talents were abilities that did not exist in YGGDRASIL but which were unique to this world. About 1 in every 200 people was born with a talent. While talent holders were not rare, the abilities themselves varied greatly in potency and type. For instance, there were talents like being able to predict tomorrow's weather with 70% accuracy. The ability to strengthen summoned monsters, hastening the harvest by several days, using the magic of the dragons which once ruled this world, and so on. However, all of these were inborn abilities, which could not be chosen or changed. It was quite common to encounter situations where these abilities could not be applied. If someone was born with a talent that could improve the destructive power of their magic, but they never had the chance to become a magic caster, then their talent would be useless. There were very few people who could make good use of their talents. There were almost no talents which could dictate the course of one's entire life, apart from a few exceptionally powerful talents. The best proof of that statement was Gazef Stronov, who was a warrior without a talent. However, people with combat-applicable talents tended to go into the adventuring profession. Therefore, talent holders were a common sight among adventurers. The person before him was one of those lucky few who could fully utilize his talent. I think his talent had something to do with being suited to studying magic, and he only took 4 years to learn what should have taken 8 years. I'm not a magic caster, so I'm not sure how great that is. Ains was a magic caster as well. Those words made him curious, and awoke a collector's desire within him. This was an ability which the great underground tomb of Nazarick did not possess, and which could strengthen the organization. If he could gain control of that ability, it might be worth making enemies of everyone here. Shrinking the time it took to learn an ability like this should have been the province of a super-tier spell, Wish Upon a Star. The two of them continued talking, without realizing that Ains was watching them under his helmet, like a tiger ready to pounce on its prey. I'm really lucky that I was born with this ability, because it allowed me to take a step closer to my dream. Without this power, I would have ended my days as a lowly peasant. Ninya's muttering was gloomy and solemn. As though to sweep away the grim air hanging over the room, Peter continued in a completely different tone. Well, no matter what, you're still a famous talent holder in this city. Still, there's people more famous than me. The leader of Blue Rose? That person's famous too, but I was talking about someone within this city. You mean, Beriashi? Shouted the last person, who had not yet been introduced yet. Ains was curious about the name and asked, and what sort of talent does that person have? A look of surprise came over all four of them. It would seem this was common knowledge. Ains had asked that question because he was curious and wanted to acquire an ability which could strengthen Nazarick. Therefore, in response to the regret he felt over his carelessness, he told himself that there had to be some way to recover from a mistake like this. However, before Ains could explain, the other side came to a conclusion of their own. I see. The reason why we don't know you at all despite that stylish full plate and your beautiful companion is because you're not from around here, am I right? Ains nodded at this heaven-sent mercy of a question. Indeed, that is correct. The truth is, we only arrived here yesterday. Oh, so you wouldn't know, then. He's a famous person in this town, but he's probably not that famous that distant cities would know about him, huh? Yes, I've never heard of him before. If you don't mind, could you tell me about him? His name is Nefiria Beria, the grandson of a famous herbalist. His talent allows him to use any magic item. Not only can he use scrolls of a different spell-casting system from himself, he can even use items made by the non-human races. Even items restricted to those of royal blood shouldn't be a problem either. Oh. Ains tried his best not to let them hear the awe in his voice. How much could his talent do? Could he use the staff of Ains Ulgaun, which only the guildmaster could use, as well as world-class items? Or did it have limits? He was someone to be wary of, but he could be very useful as well. Nabril seemed to feel the same way. She brought her mouth close to where Ains's ears would be under the helmet, and whispered, I think that person is dangerous. I know. Coming to this city was the right decision. Morn-san, is something the matter? Oh, no, it's fine, don't worry. Speaking of which, could you tell me about your last friend? Yes. He's a druid Dinewood-wander. He uses healing spells and magic that controls nature, and he's well versed in herbal lore. Let him know if there's anything wrong with your body. He has medicine that's good for stomach pains. Pleased to meet you, came the greeting from the burly, barbaric-looking man with a full, bushy beard. However, he seemed younger than how Ains appeared. There was a very faint smell of grass from him, which came from the cloth pouch tied to his waist. Then, it's time for us to introduce ourselves. She is Nabe. I am Morn. Pleased to meet you. Pleased to meet you. Wonderful, I hope we'll get along. Then, Morn-san, just address me by my first name. Right, while it feels a little wrong to get to business so abruptly, we should probably start discussing the job. As for that, the truth is what we're asking you for doesn't really qualify as work. That means, Upon hearing Ains's confusion, Peter extended his hand to halt him, with the intention of delaying the question for a later date. This job is to hunt the monsters that appear around the town. Clearing out monsters, huh? That was enough to count as work. Or was there some special adventurer reason which made him say that it did not qualify? Ains wanted to ask about that, but if this was common knowledge, asking that question might make him appear clueless, which was bad. Therefore, he tried asking a safe question instead. What sorts of monsters will we be exterminating? We're not exterminating monsters. After hunting monsters, the city council will pay us a reward based on their strength. What do they call it where you come from, Morn-san? So that was it. Ains understood. When Peter said that this did not qualify as work, in YGGDRASIL terms, it was more like killing spawned monsters and taking the items they dropped. This is something we have to do to make a living, said the druid Dinewood Wonder in his deep baritone. Following that, Lucret spoke up as well. For us, it's making a living, but what we do also reduces the danger to the surrounding people. The traders can come and go in peace and the country can collect its taxes. All in all, it's a way to earn money without anyone losing out. Nowadays, most countries with guilds do this, but 5 years ago, this sort of thing was non-existent. It's quite surprising. Everyone in the team nodded as Ninya spoke. They began chatting amongst themselves, leaving no openings for Ains to cut in. Still, it would be odd to know absolutely nothing about this country, so Ains decided to shut up and listen to what they said. It's all thanks to the Golden Princess, long may she live. She proposed a policy through that would waive taxes on adventurers, although it never got passed. Oh, to think she paid so much attention to adventurers. Indeed, some rulers would treat armed organizations who were not loyal to the country as enemies. Even the Empire isn't so generous. That princess sure is brilliant, coming out with all these great proposals. Although almost all of them were shot down. I want to marry a beautiful girl like that. Then, shouldn't you work on getting ennobled? Oh, no way, I couldn't live a stifled life like that. I think being a noble's not bad. After all, the kingdom pretty much allows a noble to trample the peasants and do as they please. There was a strong undercurrent of mockery hidden beneath Ninya's words. Ains furrowed his non-existent brows within his helmet, but Nabril remained still, a nonchalant look on her face. Lucret replied in a jovial tone. Ooh, that tongue of yours is still so vicious. You really hate nobles, don't you? I know that some nobles are honorable, but my big sister was taken away by that pig. I can't not hate nobles. We're getting sidetracked here. We shouldn't be talking about this sort of thing in front of our comrades, Mornshi and Miss Nabe. After Dine tried to get everyone back on track, Peter coughed in an incredibly fake manner before continuing. And so, we'll be searching for monsters in the nearby region. We're close to a developed region, so the monsters shouldn't be too strong. Does that displease you, Morn-san? Peter spread a piece of parchment on the table. It looked to be a map of the surrounding region. The map showed villages, forests, rivers, and so on. Basically, we'll be heading south and looking around this area. His finger moved from the center of the parchment to the vicinity of the southern forest. We'll be hunting monsters in the forest bordering the slain theocracy. The only creatures who can hit the back line are goblins with magic items that grant flight. However, we won't get much for killing such weak monsters. Ains had his doubts about this group's easygoing attitude. From what Ains knew, there were many kinds of named goblins in YGGDRASIL, and their levels ranged from 1 to 50. Since individual goblins could vary widely in power, one could not lump the goblins into one big group. A moment's carelessness could lead to dire consequences. Did their relaxed attitudes mean that they were confident of not encountering high-level goblins, or did it mean that this world's goblins were simply that weak? What if a powerful goblin shows up? While it's true that powerful goblins exist, they won't show up in the forest we're heading towards, because these goblins are usually tribal leaders. They won't mobilize their entire tribes just for us. The goblins know about humanity's area of influence, so they're fully aware of the retaliation that'll be headed that way if they launch a large-scale attack. It's especially true when it comes to the stronger goblins, since they tend to be the higher-ranked and more intelligent members of their species. Plus, Nabe-san can use third-tier magic, so it should be fine even if we encounter high-level goblins, right? I see. However, I'd like to remind you that there are goblins who can use third-tier magic. Just for my reference, could you tell me about the monsters we might encounter? The Swords of Darkness turned in unison to look at Ninya. Picking up on their thoughts, Ninya began explaining with a teacherly look on his face. We're likely to encounter goblins and the wolves they raise. As for other monsters, there haven't been any strong ones sighted around this area. The most dangerous monsters we might encounter on the plains are probably ogres. We won't be entering the forest. Yes, because the forest is very dangerous. We can still deal with things like jumping leeches and giant beetles. But the hanging spiders which spit webs at you from the trees and the forest worms which maul you from the ground with their huge jaws are harder to handle. No wonder. Ains nodded in acknowledgement. So their aim was to hunt the monsters from the forest which made their way onto the plains. That's how it is, Morn-san. How about it? Want to lend us a hand? Then, I'll be in your care. Although before that, could you tell me about the pay for this? Ah, yes, that's right, the payment is very important. Basically, since Morn-san's team and our team are working together, the plan is to split it evenly. Going by the numbers in our teams, it seems awfully generous. However, when the monsters appear, I hope you and Nabe-san will take half of them as well. We can only use spells of up to the second tier. So when we factor your abilities in, that division of the money seems quite logical. Ains pretended to think for a while before nodding his head in agreement. I have no problems with that arrangement. Then, let us fight shoulder to shoulder. Also, since we're working together, I guess I should let everyone see my true face. With that, Mong removed his helmet. The four people before him seemed quite surprised by what they saw. Black eyes and hair like Nabe-san, so he shouldn't have been born in this area. I've heard that in the south people like Morn-san are commonplace. Did you come from that region? Yes. We have come here from a faraway land. He's older than I thought. He's already an uncle. Hey, that's rude. A warrior on par with a magic caster of the third tier should be around that age. Miss Nabe's pretty amazing too. Ains's keen ears picked up their whispered words, with the exception of Peter's. Being called an uncle made Ains feel uncomfortable, but it probably couldn't be helped that he was an uncle in the eyes of these youngsters. If one was an adult by the age of 16, then Ains was definitely an uncle to them. I'll be covering my face up after showing it to you. There might be trouble if other people know I'm a foreigner. With that, Ains put his helmet back on again. After that, he smiled in satisfaction under his helmet. This was because Ains had enchanted himself with an illusion, although it was a low-grade type, which would be seen through if touched just in case. Since we'll be hunting together, it would probably be good to get questions out of the way at this point. Do you have anything to ask me? Me. A hand shot up toward the ceiling after Ains asked his question. That hand belonged to Lucret. After making sure that nobody else was asking a question other than himself, Lucret cheerfully asked Nabril. What kind of relationship do you two have? The room was filled with silence. ch1.audio.com. Ains had no idea what Lucret meant by that question. However, Peter and his people had picked up on Lucret's intentions. We are companions. After Ains's answer, Lucret's next few words threw the room into an uproar. I've fallen for you. It's love at first sight. Please go out with me. Everyone turned to look at Lucret. After realizing that Lucret's words were not a joke to deepen their friendship, Ains shifted his gaze to Nabril. As the center of attention, Nabril took a deep breath before replying. Silence, inferior life form, slug. Learn your place before speaking again, or should I rip your tongue out of your head? The silence was even more deafening than before. Ah, no. Ains made to lighten the mood, but Lucret stole a march on him and said, thank you for the firm rejection. Then, let's start as friends. Die, inferior life form, maggot. How could I possibly be friends with you? Or do you want me to gouge out your eyeballs with a spoon? After turning away from the feuding pair, Ains and Peter bowed to each other in apology. My comrade has made trouble for you. No, I should be the one apologizing. We'll call it quits, then. Is that all right? Peter looked around before speaking, though he kept his eyes from the grinning Lucret and the cold-eyed Nabril. Then, Morn-san, if you're ready, then let's move out. We're already prepared. After hearing the word, ready, Ains suddenly thought of something. They had already purchased the minimum required gear from the innkeeper. Although Ains and Nabril did not need to waste space on food and drinks, it would be weird if they did not eat or drink anything, so they had some ready just in case. All right, once we distribute the rations, we can set out right away. Are rations the only thing you need to prepare? If you're not going to buy them from a specialist shop, why not get some dry rations from the counter? They'll prepare them for you right away. Is that so? That's good to hear. We can finish our preparations right away. Then, let's go. Everyone rose and left the room. After returning to the guild lobby, there were more adventurers than before, and there were several teams standing near the parchment-covered notice board. However, everyone's attention seemed focused on a certain teenager. The blonde-haired teenager was talking to one of the counter girls, and the other two receptionists were leaning in to eavesdrop on their conversation. If things had been busy when Ains came in, the current situation was now the exact opposite. The counter girl's face her mouth was in an O shape. It was a look of surprise. And the person she was looking at was none other than Ains himself. What's going on here? Just as doubt started welling up inside Ains, the counter girl approached and said, there is a job here asking for you by name. Those words changed the air in the room instantly. Ains could feel many curious eyes staring unreservedly at him. The swords of darkness were similarly shocked. Nabril shifted briefly at the unpleasant change in the room's atmosphere. This was to make it easier to act during the critical early stages of a battle. Ains could not help but feel worried by this. This is bad. Nabril's movements are bad. Judging by the way Nabril stood beside him, she must have thought that something strange was about to happen and had taken up a defensive posture to protect Ains. However, it was an action completely unfitting for a situation like this. Normal people would not do such a thing under these circumstances. Granted, protecting Ains was her top priority, but her movements were far too thoughtless. You idiot. Albedo's the same way too. What the hell are the both of you thinking? No. It's more like they didn't think at all. They feel like they can crush humans like insects because they look down on them. While that sort of attitude could not be helped from NPCs of a guild composed of heteromorphic beings, Ains or Gown, there was a time and place for that sort of thing. An annoyed Ains wanted to ask his past comrades, Why are all your NPCs like this? Quote, he did not care what kind of backstory they had, but they need to have basic social skills, as well as the ability to take note of the time, place, situation, and respond accordingly. He did not have time to scold Nabril now. If someone discovered that Nabril was in battle mode, who knew what sort of trouble they might get into? Ains immediately karate chopped Nabril on the head. Although he did not use his full strength, he was still wearing his Jangrai PR. Nabril looked back at Ains with tear-filled eyes, a look of surprise and confusion on her face, as though Ains had grievously wounded her with that strike. However, Ains paid her no heed and asked the counter girl, "And who is this person who has asked for me by name?" The moment those words cleared his mouth, Ains cursed himself. Who else could it be but the boy in front of him? That would be Nefiria Barrier-san. I just heard that name. As Ains thought this, the boy approached him. Pleased to meet you. I was the one who put out that job. The boy nodded slightly, and Ains returned the gesture. Actually, this request. Before the boy could finish speaking, Ains raised his hand to interrupt. My deepest apologies, but I've already made an agreement with someone else for a job, so I cannot accept your request right away. The air in the room seemed to shudder as he said this. The reaction of the Swords of Darkness was more intense than Ains's own. Morn-san. He asked for you by name. Peter's response filled Ains with doubt. Was a personal request something to be surprised about? However, that may be so, but should I not carry out the job I've been requested to do earlier? Ains's decision seemed to have been the right one. Some of the adventurers around him were nodding in approval. Just then, he had a flash of inspiration. However, our job is hardly a request. If we don't meet any monsters, there won't be any pay to speak of. Peter's words to Ains trailed off, and he sounded reluctant to speak them. Being hired by the boy with the famous grandmother was a far cry from wandering around the place trying to kill monsters. That was why Peter sounded like he wanted to give up on the job. With that conclusion in mind, Ains gently said, "Then how about this, Peter-san? Barrier-san has not told me about the job's details, payment, time frame, and such. I will hear him out and make my decision then. I'm all right with that, of course. Though I'd like to finish it quickly, it can wait a day or two. Then, please allow my friend from Swords of Darkness to be present during the job briefing. No, I should say, if the negotiations fall through, I would like the privilege of carrying out my previous task first. Morn-san, is it all right for us to come with you? Of course. I hope you will be party to the discussion and provide your opinions." After the Swords of Darkness gave their approval, Ains and company returned to the room from just now. He felt very busy. Once more, Ains smiled bitterly and took his seat from just now. Nabril sat beside him, while the boy was one seat away from them. The Swords of Darkness went back to their previous places. The first to speak among them was, of course, the boy. The receptionist mentioned it earlier, but I think it would be best if I introduced myself. I am Nefiria Barrier, and I work as a herbalist in this city. As for the details of the job, I will soon be heading into the nearby forest as planned. Since everyone knows the forest is dangerous, I was hoping that you could be my guardians, as well as help in harvesting herbs if possible. Bodyguarding, huh? I see. Ains nodded calmly. He had the feeling that this job would be a troublesome one. Ains knew he was powerful, and he could probably exterminate any attacking monster when working with Nabril. However, he was not as confident when it came to carrying out an escort mission. This was because Ains and Nabril were both magic casters, and lacked the specialized magic and skills needed to become shields for other people. compared to the usual amount, the payment will be. Please hold on a moment. The task of bodyguarding suits you well. Then, Peter-san, would you like me to take you on instead? If it's a job that involves bodyguarding and harvesting herbs, don't you think we'd be more effective with Lucret-san the ranger and Dine-san the druid? Oh, good eye, mourned she. As a druid, I can show my true ability in the forest, perhaps even more so than Lucret the ranger. Dine's baritone seemed to carry an undercurrent of pride. Lucret was not happy and said, Dine-san, you really went and said it, huh? It's an undeniable truth, given the abilities of druids. And don't forget that I'm trained in herbalism too. HMPH Peter, I'm fine too. I'll show you who's the better of us, between Druid-san and myself. I'll take that to be agreement, then. If we see any monsters on the way, we'll kill them and claim the reward when we get back to town. As for Beria-san's payment, what if we divided it equally, Peter-san? If you're fine with it, then I have no objections, Morn-san. Beria-san, sorry for the wait. If it's all right with you, could you permit everyone here to accept the job that you just offered? I don't mind that. Then, I'll be counting on all of you. You can just call me Nefiria. Ains and the others began introducing themselves to Nefiria. Although Nabra lashed Lucret with her sharp tongue, they managed to successfully complete their self-introductions. Then, what I've done in the past is to proceed to Kani village to set up a base of operations before venturing into the forest. The amount of time we'll spend depends on the herbs that we can gather, but it will be 3 days at the latest. In the past, it's been a couple of days on average. Will we be walking there? Yes. There will be a horse cart, but it'll be full of pots and bottles for gathering herbs, so there's not much room for you to ride. Can we replenish our rations in Kani village? Water should be fine, but food might be a problem, because Kani village isn't very big. The Swords of Darkness began discussing the preparations for the journey, as well as asking Nefiria several questions. As Ains saw this, he decided to speak up as well. May I ask a few questions? After seeing Nefiria smile and nod in reply, Ains began with the first question. Why me? I've only arrived in this city by carriage recently, and as such I have no friends here, nor am I renowned in this area. That being the case, why did you ask for me? In addition, you mentioned that you've done this in the past, which implies that in the past you've hired other adventurers. How about them? Ains's gaze was keen under his helmet. He did not know why the boy had called him out. If he had been exposed, then he would need to change his disguise and his approach to things. Ains studied Nefiria closely, though he could not see his eyes, due to the hair concealing him, but he could not tell what the boy truly wanted. Could it be that he was overthinking this? Just as Ains was beginning to get suspicious, Nefiria replied, the adventurers I hired in the past have all left Rantal for another city. That's why I was looking for new adventurers. Also, actually, I heard about what happened in the inn from one of its guests. What happened in the inn? Yes, I heard that someone effortlessly threw an adventurer 1 rank higher than himself. I see. Ains had planned to use a show of strength to increase his renown. Had this boy taken the bait? Once more, as suspicion welled up in Ains, Nefiria smiled and pointed to the plate on Ains's breastplate. Plus, copper-ranked adventurers are cheaper, right? Hopefully we'll get along for a while yet. I do hope so. Ains understood how it was like to hire an untested rookie. He slowly felt himself lowering his guard, but there was one thing that worried him. If that really happened. As Ains thought about this, the other were asking questions one by one, which Nefiria took in stride. After there were no more questions, Nefiria announced, "Then, let's move out once we're ready."